Okay, welcome to our tutorial about machine applique using a satin stitch. And for this activity you will need some base fabric, some coloured or design top fabric, and then some bondweb, which you can get in any stitching or craft store, and it's got a paper side and it's got a side which has got a thin layer of glue on. And the first thing you want to do is iron this glue side down onto the back of your design fabric. Okay, and so once you've ironed that, it will stick onto the back of the back of the design fabric, and you'll end up with something which looks like this. Okay, and it's stuck into place. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw around my template. I'm going to do a star today, and the paper is really good because it means that we can draw really easily on the back. But something to remember is, if you're doing something like a letter or a number, is that it's going to be flipped on the other side. Obviously with my star it doesn't matter. Okay, so I've drawn my star shape. I'm just going to cut that out with fabric scissors, but cut all the way around the outside. Here's one I made earlier. I've always wanted to say that. And it's got, so now I've got my star shape with bondweb ironed onto the back. And what I need to do now is to remove this paper backing. It can be a bit fiddly. Sometimes you can just rip a small section of it, and you'll be able to see that the bondweb is stuck on the back. It's sort of slightly tacky. A bit of that's come off there, but I can probably move it back to being underneath. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to iron this glue side downwards onto our base fabric. Not glue side up, otherwise it will stick to the iron. Okay, so iron that down and it will stick, and it will look something like this. Okay, so now it's ironed into place. There's no need to pin anything while we're sewing, and it doesn't move around. We're going to sew, we're going to put a piece of scrap paper underneath, and if you're richer than our school, you'll be able to afford stitch and tear, which won't damage the needle quite so much, but we just use scrap paper, it's so much easier. And that will keep our stitch really nice and straight. We're going to do a satin stitch to cover all of these raw edges of the fabric. You could just use a straight stitch and straight stitch round if you were happy to see that sort of raw edges, if that was the effect that you wanted to have. So on my sewing machine, I'm going to program in a zigzag stitch. I'm going to change the width of the stitch to being 4, which is the standard width I tell all students, but depending on the size of your applique, if it's quite small you might want a sort of slightly narrower stitch. And then we're going to change our stitch length to 0.4, and that should give us a very nice smooth satin stitch. Okay, so we're going to sew round these edges. We're going to keep the line or the gap in the middle of the presser foot lined up with the edge of our design. I'll go quite slow to start with. But something that you don't want to see is gaps in your applique stitching, so turning the corners is very important. Keep the edge of the fabric lined up with that gap in the middle of your foot, and sew all the way to the end of the line, and then slightly further. Okay, and then usually when we turn a corner we leave the needle down in the work, but this time we're going to leave it up, and that will allow us to carefully position our work so that the tops of the satin stitch overlap each other. We don't want to see any gaps at all. I'm going to speed up a little bit. When you get to the point, you just want to go slightly further than the point. Leave the needle up. Reposition it. Put the press foot down. Keep the edge of the fabric lined up. Go a little bit further than the corner. Lift the presser foot up. Turn it round. If you're doing a curve, you'll have to guide it around the edges of the curve slowly. And the idea is that we're covering all the raw edges with our satin stitch. You need to whistle. Something to remember though is this: if your work seems to get caught, so it stops moving, don't keep going hoping that it'll start, because you'll just jam the machine up. Just take the work out and you can start again from where you left off, trying not to leave any gaps. There. Okay, trim your loose threads. And there you have it.